This morning, what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the traits that we have identified of effective pastors. And those of you that have heard me speak before, I never set out to be an author. That was not on my bucket list. But as I began to work with churches and congregations around the country, there was obviously some resources that were being asked for or identified. And those were the resources that were created from the requests and from those gaps out in the field that we found. Necessary 9 is not an exception to that. We were looking at the appointment process. We were looking at the planter process. We were looking at bringing leadership up at district and conference levels. We were looking at what does it take to bring leaders up in local churches. And so what were we finding in common with effective pastors? And so that's where this resource was born from, is as we began to look at what are those traits, how can we identify those traits, because then we can offer ways to move into that effectiveness. So that's where we're going to start today. So one of the things that we began to wonder about is, are you born a leader or do you develop people as leaders? So what do y'all think? Where would you land if you were asked that question? Are you born a leader or do you develop as a leader? Thank you very much.
I think you develop, you're born with certain traits, you have to enhance them.
Okay, born and then enhance. How about some of the rest of you? What do you think? Maybe we should.
You can definitely develop a leader.
Okay.
Someone who may be reluctant, as I was, to step forward.
Okay, all right, develop. Any of you just think, we're leaders, we're just born as leaders, it's just... Yes, you do? Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that if you would.
I think that everybody has their own talents. As we hear in the Bible, they branch with many vines and vine with many branches. And some people have that built-in talent. You can always develop it. There are some people who have that talent and they don't really realize it, and yes, you can develop that. But
yes.
usually there is a God-given talent for leaders.
Right. So really what we kind of identified is, I think it's yes and both and. That some are born with it and can develop, and some are maybe born with as much of a characteristic of a leader, but if they decide to do that, they can certainly develop that. So today we're going to explore those 9 traits of effective pastors. And do you all know you have a bonus today too? Because we're also going to explore what are the 2 most effective traits of churches that are growing and vital. And unfortunately, you wouldn't know that by the book cover, that those 2 things are in that book. But we felt like if we're going to talk about what it takes to be an effective pastor, we certainly need to talk about what it takes to be an effective congregation. We're going to evaluate along the way. So you'll see in your handout there's a little place. So I want you to be thinking about, as we go along and we talk about each of the traits, what does each of those look like, feel like for you? And maybe as you think about this, how self-aware are you? And would you want to go back and maybe ask some of your staff or significant others in your life to say, so here's my perception, but what would your perception be? So kind of a check-in along the way. Have y'all ever read The 9 Things a Leader Must Do by Henry McLeod? Have you ever read Henry McLeod? Great leader. Yeah, great leader. Listen to this quote from this book for him. He says, "Who is this person was not born at all?" He's speaking of a leader. "It was a way of behaving. People who found what they were looking for in life seemed to do a certain set of things in common. A certain set of things in common. If you were not born with these patterns for leadership in place, you can indeed learn them." So one of the first traits that we felt like was really important that we saw in effective pastors was you show up and you move in. Now, that sounds pretty elementary, does it not? You show up and you move in. But let's unpack that a little bit, because I think we're talking about perhaps a different level than some of us might think about. So, if at all possible, it is best for you to live in the mission field. Why would that be important?
Surround yourself with your job.
Surround yourself with a job. Build relationships. What else? Learn the culture. Who are you appointed to? Or what are you appointed to?
What am I appointed?
Yeah. For those of you that are serving as lead pastors, you're appointed, yes? What are you appointed to? The parish, the community. You are not just appointed to the church. And I think sometimes we forget that, and I believe laity forget that, or maybe have never even been told that, right? So if you're appointed to the community, if you're appointed beyond the church, then living in the mission field is terribly important. You become part of the community, interweaved in the community. There's a commitment to the community. I always say enthusiasts, passion, drive, whatever you want to call it. Show up and be excited about where you're at and excited about the possibilities of what God can do. You can get by with a lot just showing up with passion. But if we show up and we aren't happy to be there and our community, let alone our congregation knows that, they're going to read it. And it's going to be difficult to follow someone who you know doesn't want to be there or isn't excited about being there. The question is, are you all in? We are part of the appointment system. We are United Methodist, yes? But we have this process that gives you new zip codes every once in a while, yes? And sometimes we're not all in because we're not sure how long we're going to be there. The question is, do we have the commitment to be all in, not knowing how long we're going to be there, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to show up and I'm going to become a part of this community and this church, regardless if it's a year or 20. Because friends, people know that. If we go in and even have the conversation and say, well, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, how are people going to respond to you relationally if they're not even sure that you don't have both feet in the water, that your toes just in the water? Are you all in? As much as I'm sure you don't like the word business, but for lack of a better word, we are in the people business. We are in the relationship business. And so being all in means I am there relationally. And we have to be there relationally beyond the church. How many of you have ever moved to a new church? All of you, right? All of you, right? So sometimes we show up and then we try to figure out what to do. Those churches and pastors that I work with, here's the suggestion that I ask them to consider. Prior to your arrival, but knowing that you're coming, talk with your SPR rep or the council chair or the lay leader, whichever is the appropriate person in that particular setting, and say, I would like to have some cottage conversations or coffees or whatever it is, right? And you all have done this, right? But if you get them set up even before you're there, you hit the ground running. People know you're anticipating and excited to get there because you already have it set up. So those first couple of weeks when you're trying to unpack, you're also building relationships. When you gather in those cottage conversations, I want you to do it in people's homes. Why do you think that's important? We should have had coffee first, I can tell.
That's where they're really themselves.
That's where they're themselves. Yep. What else? They're comfortable. Yep. What else? You get to see them outside the church. You get to see how they live. You get to see how they interact with others, right? Here's the twist on it, though. My guess, unless you ask specifically, they will be likely to say, well, we're going to put the United Methodist women together for a cottage conversation. We're going to put this Sunday school class, and we're going to put the youth parents together. And it's all those people that already hang out together, okay? What I'm going to ask for you to do or to consider is ask that person to say, mix the groups up. Have people in the conversation together that don't necessarily have conversations on a regular basis. Now, why in the world would that be important?
It builds the whole, it builds the church.
Builds the whole, builds the church. What else?
They don't have different perspectives on things.
They have different perspectives on things. And they probably haven't heard those from one another because they don't hang out together, right? So the things that you believe about your church are probably from the social circle or those that you interact with all the time anyway. So when you mix the groups up, not only are you as the pastor learning things about the church, but your parishioners are learning things from one another that they might not know or have the perspectives of ahead of time. So what do? How does it look? First of all, I want you to have one consistent person there taking notes for you, right? Why wouldn't you take the notes?
You can't listen and take notes.
You can't listen, and you can, but it's not fully present, right? Yeah, so you can be fully present and knowing that the information is being logged by someone else. And when it's a consistent person throughout, you know that you have the consistency in what people are hearing in the filters, right? I want you to ask the same questions each time so that you have comparison information. All right, here's some of the questions. What are your dreams for the future? What's the best thing about your church? What would you want changed? What would you want changed? What do you like least about your church? And if you were the new pastor, if you're sitting in my chair, what would you do in the first 3 months? What do you think that last question is getting you? Why is that last question important?
Find out what they expect
Find out what they expect? Yep.
or desire.
Or desire? Yep. It's almost giving you permission, friends. They're saying what they'd like to see done. And so the likelihood of getting pushback from those things, the very things that they tell you to do, you've been given permission. Right? So they're clearing the way, and you need some wins. You need some early wins. You need chips in the bank, however you say it, right? And this gives you the opportunity to know where you can gather those coins, all right? When you show up, not only are you building relationships with those inside the church, but it is important for you to build relationships with the community, and specifically community leaders. This needs to be done right outside the gate, right out of the gate, okay? Visit the local leaders in the community. Don't ask them to come to you. You go out to them. Why is that important? It's part of weaving yourself into the fabric of the community, to be where they are, to get the sense and the culture and the environment in which people are working, all right? So, thinking of local leaders, who are the first people you'd want to go and talk to? What kind of folks? Council? Mayor?
School principals or district superintendent,
Yep. What else?
police, fire.
Police chief, fire chief? Yep. And not only the school principal and the school superintendent, it is really helpful to go and talk to the school counselor. The school counselor has their finger on the pulse of the day-to-day stuff that goes on, much more so than the administration. Don't skip over those others, but add the counselor to your list too, okay? Here's a question I'd like for you to ask your community leaders as you're moving about the community, getting to know people. Who do you know that I need to know? Who do you know that I need to know? Who are the movers and shakers in town that I should meet? Do you see? You're allowing your community leaders to help you network with the very people that you need to network. They're going to name them, and then that way you're in front of the very people that are the movers and shakers in the community from the very beginning. But you're going to have to ask for that. Now, some of that you can find out inside your church, but the leaders in the community are going to be able to articulate probably different people than the others. Now, you're building relationships, so it's a casual conversation, right? But here's some things that you might want to ask just to kind of drill down a little bit more. So the first questions you might ask are, what are the needs of the community? What are the needs of the community? Why do you need to know that?
Why would you need to know that?
Why would you need to know that?
To gain the interest of the people, if they do something that they're searching.
Okay? Know the interest of the people. I didn't become relevant. Somebody back here.
Said how the church can help.
How the church can help. Yep. Yep. When we're thinking about doing visioning for the church, visioning comes from the intersection of the needs of the community, the passions of your leaders, and the gifts of your congregation. So if we don't know what the needs of our community are, friends, our vision is not going to be necessarily correct. And sometimes we think we know what the needs are, but those needs are through the filter of Christian folks who have maybe only ever been a Christian, who don't have the perspective or the social circles with the unchurched. And because of that, when we only try to gain that information internally, sometimes we're off base. Yeah.
Could you say that visioning and learning those three things?
Visioning comes from the intersection of the needs of the community, the gifts of your congregation, and the passions of your leaders. You're welcome. Now, drill down on the needs. How many social entities in the community are already providing food and clothing? You can be any sort of organization and do that, right? And many do. Try to get beyond the top three, food, shelter, and clothing. Help drill down. You know, do we have single parents that are struggling? Are people struggling financially? Do we need help with parenting? I mean, what are the needs beyond the basics? Because, friends, that's where we have trouble peeling back the onion as churches. And so we become social justice on the surface, but we never peel back the needs beyond the basics. And because of that, we miss the opportunity many times for relationship. So help your leaders, or ask your leaders for help in peeling back that onion. The second question to ask community leaders is, what could our church do to be helpful? What could our church do to be helpful? And the third question, and the most important question for you as the new pastor in town, is what do you know about the United Methodist Church, and specifically First United Methodist Church, or whatever the name of your church is? Why is that important?
Do you have a brand?
Do you have a brand? What else?
I didn't hear what they said.
Do you have a brand?
You have a brand.
Yeah.
I think it also helps for you to know what maybe misconception, and also know how you're perceived by the community.
That's
and what
correct.
You want to change.
That's right. So why are those perceptions important to know?
Why are their perceptions important? Because that's how they view who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what they will expect from you. And it's important if it's a wrong perception.
Mm-hmm.
And why did they get that perception?
Mhm.
Find out why that you might go about correcting it.
Right. So if you dial this process up one notch, what if you took some of your leaders with you to these community leader interviews? And my guess is your leaders are going to find out some new information about their church and their community. So when we have these conversations, we're finding out about the community, but we're also finding out about ourselves. So when we find out about ourselves, when we go back to the church and talk at church council and say, did you all have any idea what we're known for in this community? What are we known for? Unfortunately, too many churches aren't known for anything. Oh, yes, the building on the corner. But no signature ministry. Or one of the churches I was working with, do you know what they were known for? You're the pie church. Fundraisers, exactly. Exactly. Is that what you want to be known for? So it's important to ask this question, and it's important for your leaders to know how they would answer this question. Right? Now, I'd like for you to take out your piece of paper, specifically on this slide, and I think about a number between 1 and 10. Okay, this is your own self-evaluation. You can cover it up. You can write it small if you don't want your neighbor to see it. Okay? A 1 means I have a lot of work to do here. A 10 means I excel in this category and I don't really need any work on it. Okay? Take a moment, write your number down. Everybody got your number? All right, I would like for you to turn to a partner and share. You don't have to share your number, but just share where some possible growth areas are or where you have found help in this area to help with the effectiveness. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Share with a partner. Trait number 2 is listen up and lead with your ears. Do you ever think you'd hear that? Listen up and lead with your ears. So the idea is that even before you arrive, that you are listening to the community. Now, how do you do that? Even before you arrive, you'd be listening to the community. Newspapers, what else? Mission Insight. What else? Facebook groups. What else? If there's any city or borough, that's a new word for me, by the way, websites, around the communities, those websites, Chamber of Commerce, those kinds of things, be looking beyond the church. You even want to be looking at your church website and your church Facebook page. What does that tell you? What story is that telling you from an outside perspective before you ever go in? And that would be interesting then once you arrive to compare the two. So what would the perceptions of someone new be compared to the reality on the streets or inside the church, right? So learn as much as you can prior to arrival. Now, we've talked already, or most of the time here, about going to a new place. But I'd like for us to also consider that this is something that we do continuously as we serve. See, because we began to, as we're there for a while, we begin to see through the eyes of everyone else who has been there for a while. So unless we continuously seek those outside perspectives and have those conversations outside the community and continue to look at those websites, we are going to get tunnel vision just like everyone else is probably. So even though we're talking about this sometimes from the perspective of being new at the church, this is something that we should be repeating continuously throughout your appointment. So learn as much as you can before you show up. Learn about your context and your church, which may not be one and the same, right? What's happening inside the church may not be the same as what's happening in the community on the streets. Many times that's our disconnect, right? We're no longer contextual and relevant inside the church. That's why we are disconnected from the community in which we live, because they can't identify. So it's important for us to understand both of those things. The art of listening up first, you must hear their story. And if you don't hear their story, they're not going to trust you. And if they don't trust you, you're not going to be able to lead them. Right? So what are those opportunities where you're hearing the story? Right? It's interesting when we sometimes do consultations at church, when they fill out the form, when you ask the question, have you had any major conflict in the last 20 years? Do you know what they most of the time put? No. Well, we wouldn't want anybody to know that. But do you know what happens? Before that consultation weekend is over, one-on-one conversations want us to know that story. We're not going to talk about it in public. But boy, are we going to talk about it one-on-one, because we've never healed. We've never been able to move past it because we were never able to talk about it publicly. So ask those questions too. What are the conflicts that I would probably need to know about that are going to affect my leadership or the ability to lead? What's affecting your ability to lead as you're speaking with the leaders inside your church? You've got to hear their story. Building trust is important. Now, listening up and leading with your ears, you've got to do it with intentionality. Because if we leave it to chance, it's not going to happen. If you think, oh yeah, I'll get around to all of those community leaders, or oh yeah, I'll get to hearing all those stories, it's not going to happen. Because you know why? You're going to get bogged down in the day-to-day stuff. I call this balcony time. And our churches and our leaders get bogged down in the day-to-day fires, which leaves us no time to climb up on the balcony. And if our leaders aren't spending balcony time, I can guarantee you no one else is in your church. So think of it this way. It's like you're a ship out to sea where everybody is worried about swabbing the decks and mixing and making the meals, and nobody is steering the ship. And because of that, we just get tossed around by the waves. Call it culture. I mean, we could use all sorts of metaphors for what those waves could be, right? And so we lose direction. We lose our purpose. We never get to our destination because no one is steering the ship. This, my friends, is I said there are two words that seem to be my mantra these last 3 years, and that is intentionality and strategic. If we could get those two things working in our churches and in our leadership, it would make all the difference in the world. What are we doing with intentionality? How are we being strategic in the way we're spending our times and the priorities that we're concentrating on? Because sometimes what we're spending our time on is the least important stuff. But because it's in front of us, it gets our attention. And because the mission and vision aren't always in front of us, we don't pay attention to it. And so we get tossed around in the sea, working hard. That's never the issue. We have churches doing a lot of stuff. We're busy. We're burning people out. But are we being effective in what we're doing? Are we going about our priorities with intentionality? All that being said, we also have to make sure that we're creating margins. Okay? And I mean margins for you personally and margins for the church. Here's what I mean by that. Do you ever find yourself going from meeting to meeting to meeting, or from place to place to place? Rush. Or let's say I had to stop and get gas, right? But I got to be somewhere. So let's see, how long is it going to take me to get the gas and still be on time, right? And you put in just enough time to be able to do that. Am I the only one? But friends, what if we doubled that time? Instead of allowing 15 minutes, we allowed 30 minutes? What would that allow us? So what if instead of swiping our card at the pump, that we allowed extra time, which would allow us to go inside the store? And to go inside the store to do what? Relationships. Have a conversation. Introduce yourself. Rather than going through the self-checkout lanes at the grocery store. What if we begin to go through the same cashier as much as possible to what? Build a relationship. See, the problem is because we don't build margins in our lives, it doesn't give us the opportunity to build relationships. Now, that can be at all levels. Can it not? Out in the community, with your staff, with your parishioners. I mean, think about your Sunday morning schedule. Do you have margins in your Sunday morning schedule at church that allows for relationship building? I was working with one church, and they said, we never see our pastor on Sunday other than when he's bringing the word. And so when you look at the Sunday morning schedule, well, no wonder, because we have services back to back to back. And so there is no opportunity for any conversation or relationship building. Or we have Sunday school end at the very time that worship is supposed to begin. What happens? People come in late because they had trouble wrapping up their Sunday school hour. Or, even more so, we don't have anybody to serve as greeters for our guests because they're all tied up in Sunday school. I visited a church a couple of years ago, and I arrived 10 minutes before worship. And there were supposed to be worshiping about 100. So I thought I would walk in and see people. Parking lot was full. But I walked in to their gathering space, which was funny calling it that because no one was gathered. As far as I could tell, the building was empty. And about 2 minutes before worship was supposed to start, they started flocking in, all the way between 2 minutes before and 10 minutes after. Because you know where they all were? Sunday school. You see, because it became about us rather than receiving guests. Because we haven't created any margins. So think about that from a perspective of your personal leadership, but also in the perceptions of what the church looks and feels like to the person in the pew that's been there a while, but also to the new people that are coming in. Are you creating margins in your lives that you see people? I mean, do you know sometimes you're on such a mission that you fly by somebody in a car or on foot and you didn't even notice them because we're so concentrated on where we're headed and we miss the opportunity to see people and build relationships and hear their stories so that we're building trust. They want to know you care about them before they'll care about what you want to do with them as a leader, right? All right, what's your number? 1 being, I really need to work on this. 10 being, I got this one in the bag. Write your number down. All right, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to turn to your partner. You can choose a new partner if you'd like, or stick with the same ones. And talk about what things you've done to help your listening and building trust in relationships, or maybe some areas that you want to work on. Okay, find a partner. Trait number 3 is a bias for action. A bias for action. Now, one of the things you need to understand when you arrive at a church as a new pastor, this is a quote from the book, is most of the time the congregation has been suffering from years of stagnation and or decline. The fact is, most congregations are looking in their rear view mirror, seeing their best days behind them. There's hurt. There's concern. Now, some of you are exceptions, your churches are exceptions to this rule, but the broad majority of churches could say this. And so if only we could return to the glory days. Y'all have heard, the rear view mirror is what? A 50th of the size of the windshield, but we continue to concentrate on the rear view mirror. But what's ahead of us? And if we spend all of our time thinking about what it used to be like, or if we could only go back, we're going to have trouble moving forward. So this is where the bias for action is important. Now, how many of you were told, don't do anything for the first year? Okay? All right? Now, here's my bias. That used to be the case. But have you noticed the change of pace that the world is going at? Now, be careful with this. Don't go in and trample all over everybody. You got to do relationships first. But to say that we have to wait a year, y'all, we need a sense of urgency. We don't have time to wait a year to do anything. So there's this balance between showing up, moving in, listening up. This is why all these other traits are important, because it gives you the coins in the bank to do the change, to get some action going, right? And this isn't meaning you're the only one that's action-oriented, but you are permission-giving and other people being action-oriented too, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting you come in on day one, but I am suggesting in those first few months, you need a win. What's some low-hanging fruit? And you know what sometimes it is? Cleaning out a room. Getting rid of some junk. There are sometimes I'm in churches that we have more storage room than we have places for children. The spilled milk effect. Well, nobody's using that room, so let's store stuff, and then more stuff, and then more stuff, right? What if we got a group of people together to clean out a storage room? Relationship building, and then we got something done. I mean, it's simple things like sometimes you show up and you can't see the church sign anymore because the tree is overgrown or the bush is overgrown. Do you hear they're kind of technical things? They're not adaptive things that I'm suggesting, but you're doing things that are making a difference that people can see something's happening around here. There's a change. The wind has changed. The tide has changed because we are no longer going to be about the rearview mirror. We're going to be about the windshield. We're going to move forward. We're going to be faithful. We are going to be faithful with the purpose in which God allowed this church to be planted here and to survive here. And that is what? To make disciples. Action is necessary for a new future. We can't expect to have a new future if we're not willing to do some new things. I don't know about you, but if I sit in the same place and do the same thing that I've always done and expect a different outcome, what's that called? But how many times do we do that? Or to say, well, surely if I just spend more time on social media, or surely if I just spend time on X. But it's the relationships. And the relationships give you the opportunity to move your church forward. And I can tell you, for the most part, the same things that you're going to go in and see are the same things that people have been bellyaching for a long time, but nobody took the initiative to do anything. So many of you know this about me, and Peggy surely knows this about me. My calendar was booked before I ever had a car or wheels in the state of Pennsylvania, because it was important for me to get out and to meet you all and to build relationships with you. There is no way that I can be welcome in any of your churches until you know me and there is a trust that I will handle your situation and your congregation with the care and love it deserves. So think about, those are the same thing as your cottage conversations. I knew how many churches you had. I knew which sizes. I knew what the top 16 churches were. I knew their average worship attendance. All of those things were important for me to come in here and be equipped for what we needed to do. And that allowed me to hit the ground running. Otherwise, I would have sat at my desk for the first 3 to 6 months trying to figure all that out. And I would have lost time. And I would have lost the opportunity to be out with you all and lost the opportunity to build relationships. So you can't ask for things that you're not willing to do yourself as well. We must create a sense of urgency. We don't have time to waste. I don't know if you all have noticed the numbers, like you haven't. We have no time to waste to get back to the mission of making disciples. Our churches have become inwardly focused. Not all, but many of us have. Inwardly focused would mean we're talking more about money than we're talking about our community. Inwardly focused means we're talking more about our building than we are about those who don't yet know Christ, who are our neighbors. One of you all asked me earlier this week in some of our gatherings, what do we need to do about? And I probably sound like a broken record. But y'all, I think we need to start with the basics. I think our people in the pew need to understand why we're here as a church and what our purpose is. Because sometimes we've lost that. The very purpose and why we exist has become, and this isn't Susquehanna Conference, this isn't Pennsylvania, this is United Methodist and Mainline churches. It's become about us rather than our purpose. So this bias for action allows us to begin to have those important conversations to change the direction of our church. And until they understand the why, and perhaps why we're not in alignment with the why, we're not going to get any urgency. And without a sense of urgency, it's going to be hard for people to follow you through change. I always say the what is easy to talk about, but the why is the most important thing to talk about. And in our head, we've been thinking about something for days or weeks or months, and by the time we start to communicate it with the person in the pew, we are so far ahead of them that we forget to walk back to the why. And if we don't allow them the opportunity to understand and buy in, commit to the why, we're not going to have them follow us. We're not going to get the action that we need. Sometimes you get to a church and urgency meets you at the door. You ever had that? Literally, people are sometimes meeting you at the door. But sometimes the problems are landing on your desk. And that gives you the opportunity for action sometimes. But sometimes apathy is set in, and you've got to create the urgency. And as a leader, it's up to you to know or to realize which is it. Did urgency meet me at the door, or do I need to create some energy? Most of the time, we have to create a sense of urgency, is what I find. It is the bias for action that begins to change the course of your congregation. If you're not willing to make the changes, if you're not being willing to lead, then you're not going to be able to change the direction of your church. Now, some of you may be blessed to have walked into a church that's growing and has it all figured out and has all the 9 processes worked out, and you have a happy staff and everybody's equipped. Some of you, few of you, but most of us are going to go in and need to take care of some things. Most of us need to change the direction of our church, because many of our churches, majority of our churches are in decline. And until you have a bias for action, we're not going to be able to stabilize, let alone reverse the decline. We live in a time of experimentation. To say that we all have it figured out, we're all teasing ourselves.
Every situation is unique.
Every situation is unique. Every context is different, right? But we're more alike than we are different. I always say we've all been drinking the same United Methodist Kool-Aid. Why wouldn't we all be looking alike and experiencing some of the same things? Our contexts are different, but some of the things we struggle with are more similar than different, right? Maybe the way we go about taking care of it is different, but we are more similar than different. However, the way we used to do things 2 years ago or 5 years ago are not working any longer, let alone the things that we tried 40 and 50 years ago are no longer working. So, folks, I didn't arrive here as your expert. I arrived here as someone who has been in the field, trying some things, working alongside, and we're going to try some new things. Are all of them going to work? Nope. But through experimentation, some of it's going to work. And just when we have it figured out, guess what? It's not going to work anymore. We're going to have to try something else new. So what I want to do is give you permission to try something. Let your people know up front, we're going to try something new. I'm not sure the outcome, but we're going to evaluate it after and figure out if it was the right thing to do or not. But we're going to at least try. We're not going to sit here and let the ship sink without trying something. Something. Here's the warning. Please don't try something without determining what its purpose is and what the intended outcome is. Because how will you evaluate its effectiveness if you never stated what you're trying to accomplish? But oh, friends, do we not do that in church time and time again? We have X event because we've always done it. My guess is if you gather the people who have been working on those committees tirelessly, with passion, around that event, and you say, what's the intended outcome? How will we know if it's effective? My guess is if it's been going on for more than a couple of years, you will get different answers around the table. And until we're all on the same page, looking for the same outcome, and knowing how to evaluate whether it's effective or not, we are not ready to hold that event. I don't care if we've been doing it for 20 years, we are not ready to hold that event until we're all on the same page. Because if not, you all know what happens. We have the event, and then we are tired. Yeah, we're going to talk about it someday. And we never do. But yet, when we plan and we just roll our calendar from one year to the next and it's time to plan it again, well, we've always done it, so we're going to do it again. But we never evaluated last year's. But yet, we're going to invest our resources, and energy and time are our most precious resources these days, not money. The money can come when we have everything in alignment. But see, we're trying things that aren't in alignment many times too. Or we're doing things that used to be in alignment that are no longer in alignment. And we burn our people out doing things that aren't effective. But the problem is we haven't realized they're not effective because we never figured out what it would look like to be effective. We've never named that to know how to even evaluate. Most of the churches I work with don't need to start something else for the sake of starting something else. More importantly, they need to stop some things. Everything has an expiration date. Now, that's easy for me to say because I'm not in your church looking at Aunt Ethel who started it 30 years ago. I get that. But when we begin to talk more about the why, saying, Aunt Ethel, I know that this has been very important to you. Tell me how it got started. Tell me what the purpose was. My guess is if we get to that story, it has nothing to do with what it looks like today. The Pie Church, the reason it was started is nothing like the reason it serves today. It's a missional shift is what I call it. You have to be careful how you say that. Okay? So most of the time, in order to try something new in alignment with reaching new people, we're going to have to give up some things. We're going to have to give up some things. Not for the sake of giving them up, but we're going to have to give up things because they're not serving our purpose and they're not effective. But it doesn't leave us any room to do anything new until we clear the calendar of some of the old. Because most of the time, our calendars are too full. Rather than doing a lot of things just okay, do a few things really, really well. That becomes your signature ministry. So when you're out talking to those community leaders and say, what is the church known for? They're going to be able to identify because you do it really, really well. Don't go wide, go deep. Go deep. Invest deeply. What action steps do I take? What do I try? So don't just try for the sake of trying, right? Think about what is it that I need to be doing. But above all, we've got to have a solid work ethic. We've got to be willing to put in the hours. And I don't know about you, but ministry to me isn't punching a clock. True story. One pastor's day off was on a Friday. And the youth had a two-night dinner theater. And this is how they raised money to go on their mission trip every year. Been going on for about 5 years. This is in a church that was worshiping, about 320. 2 nights because we had to have 2 different nights because there was too many people to fit in the space to do it one. But the pastor chose to come on with his family on Friday night. And the pastor chose the absolute back corner table and took away the extra chairs that his family did not take up and put them at another table. During the break, before and after, the pastor sat in the corner and didn't move from his table. So you can imagine when the staff parish chair heard and witnessed this and had a conversation with the pastor and suggested that the pastor lost an opportunity because I happen to mention the pastor had only been there 6 months. So when it was suggested that maybe that wasn't the best move for the pastor to take relationally, do you know what that pastor said? Friday is my day off. Friday was my day off. And therefore, we build solid lines around ourselves to say we don't do ministry on Friday. Now, I understand healthy boundaries. I get it. But don't show up in places where you cannot be engaged. I would have much rather that pastor not show up in those circumstances than to have shown up and acted that way. That did more harm than good, and he never recovered from that. It was 2 hours, and those 2 hours created huge obstacles for the next 5 years. and the church declined under his leadership. Because it was all about, I'll give you 40 hours, but I'm only giving you 40 hours. And my day off is on Friday. And so don't expect me to say hello on Fridays if you're a parishioner. Again, I don't know about you, but ministry to me is a way of life. So to say that Friday is my day off, that means when I go to the restaurant, I'm not going to pray, or to go to the restaurant and say to the waitress, we're going to pray in a little bit. Could we offer any prayer for you, or would you have a prayer request? No, that's my day off. Now, I know that's crazy to even think of and say, but we have pastors that are doing those kinds of things. They're shooting themselves in the foot. So it's a healthy balance between boundaries, but also showing up in the places and engaging with the people. We're in the relationship business. And locking yourself in your office is not about it unless you're writing a sermon, right? What does a solid work ethic look like for you? You have to be willing to take some risks. Like I said, not everything's going to work, but try something. But the other thing is, let your people know that you're experimenting. You know, I don't have all the answers. This world is changing all the time. But you know what? Here's what I'm going to try and why. This is what we're going to hope for an outcome. And I'd like for you to be there with me in case we fall down together. But it's going to be okay because we're going to try something, even if it is risky. Because sometimes I think we play too safe as a church. Being effective in ministry is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes persistence. So yes, we have to have a bias for action, but at the same time, we can't blow it all in the beginning to say we're going to work ourselves to death and nothing to be left, right? So it's consistent action. It's not action at the beginning and then it's over. But how are we consistently working with a good work ethic with a bias for action? It does take persistence. So what's your number? Write down your number on how effective you are with a bias for action as a leadership trait. Everybody got their number? All right, turn to your partner and share about this trait. Here's a bonus for you today. I just saw this quote when we're talking about leadership today, right? Leaders don't force people to follow them. They invite them on a journey. It's by Zig Ziglar. Any of you follow him? All right. Number 4, get spiritual. Now, we don't need to talk about this one, right? You're pastors. Oh, what'd you say? We don't think we talk about it enough. Can you say any more about that?
Well, if we don't seek Christ first, nothing we do is going to matter.
What he said is if we don't seek Christ first, nothing else is going to matter. Now, how many of you do sermon prep every week? Most of you? Yes? Right? What do you do outside of sermon prep? What else do you do outside of sermon prep for Bible study or grounding yourself? I think we read the text differently when we're doing it for sermon prep than we are for feeding our soul. So where are you getting that? How are you getting that? And sometimes even when we put pastoral groups together, are we doing that work? Or what is the purpose of those gatherings? What I find is most of the time we come together, it's fellowship. That's important. But do we get to the heart of the matter? How are we leading by example when it comes to getting spiritual? When pastors are gathering, or pastors are gathering with other pastors or with leaders, do you dare ask the question, how goes it with your soul? Because, see, sometimes we don't want to be vulnerable. The problem is, if we can't be vulnerable with one another, how are we going to be vulnerable with the world? Because, you know, our community thinks we got it all together. That suddenly we're the perfect people that have life figured out. And then until they get their life cleaned up, they're not going to find a place here. So I think part of getting spiritual is being vulnerable to say, here's where I'm falling off the tracks this week, or this month, or this season. But are we feeding our souls so that we're filled up to be able to serve others who are needing to have their souls filled up? Without spirituality, friends, you know, we don't have a prayer. We don't have a prayer in being effective, in being a good leader, because you're spiritual leaders, right? You're spiritual leaders when you're leading churches. But if we don't get spirituality, how are we going to be a spiritual leader? How are you spiritually helping, equipping your leaders? Are you taking time in your staff meetings? Now, I know not all of you have staff. Well, all of you have staff, just many of us have unpaid staff. We refer to them as volunteers. But if we were to invest in them like we do paid staff, do we do a devotion just because we're a church and we're supposed to be doing a devotion? Or do we get into the meat of it and the application of it? What does this look like today, and how does it apply to my life so that there might be a change tomorrow? How are you doing that with your leaders? Oh my goodness, I made a suggestion in church at one point to say, before you start that trustees meeting, first of all, a layperson might be able to pray. The pastor is not the only one that can pray. Sorry, guys, but we can. Guys and gals, we can. Sometimes we're not given the opportunity, or sometimes we've never been equipped or encouraged or supported. But I suggested that someone else start with prayer besides the pastor, and that we would spend some time in a devotion in feeding our souls. And do you know what I was told? Take a guess.
Pay you to pray.
That's not our purpose. That's not our purpose here. Our purpose here is to talk about the building. Gosh, folks, where have we missed the boat? That we have groups of people in our churches, members of our churches, leading our churches, that have a pushback on spiritual development. Where does that lead to? What's the source of that? How do we as leaders consistently practice putting ourselves in the means of grace? Are you vulnerable? Do you talk about where you screwed up just as much as we talk about the celebrations? You've got to find your own spiritual rhythm. What speaks to you and what feeds you is very different than the person sitting behind you, in front of you, or next to you. What is your spiritual rhythm? You know, some people find the time early in the morning to be that time where they can connect with God most. Others like that time before they go to bed as a way of resting and preparing for sleep as they spend time with God. Maybe yours is another time. But find that rhythm. Because without that rhythm, everything else feels out of whack. Y'all know what I mean? You know, there's times in your life where you go, okay, I got it figured out. It's feeling good. And then your legs get knocked out from under you and you lose your rhythm. Y'all have been there. Those are different seasons. But where's the spiritual rhythm in all of that? Are you in a place where you feel that you're in rhythm? That you're spending time with God and that you're leading from a spiritual place? Or are you leading with your head? Because when we're only leading from our head, it gets us into trouble. So what does that look like for you, and what does your spiritual rhythm look like? What does your prayer life look like? Are you praying with your family? You know, I had one pastor who, I won't share who said, I'm ashamed. This is a very effective pastor who's done well and led very, very large churches because of his effectiveness. But he said, I'm ashamed. He said, I was so worried about my church that I have now raised 2 children that don't know God, and in fact are resistant because of the damage that the church did to the family, seemingly, because I didn't help them navigate those waters and give them a spiritual basis to understand. I'm sure none of you are struggling with that, but many of our pastors are. What does it look like? What is that rhythm? How do you find that place where you know you've got that tether? Because sometimes the tether has been broken and we didn't even realize it. And we get in this place where things just aren't going right, and it's because we didn't take care of that tether back to Christ. So what is your spiritual rhythm? How's it going? I want you to think about that. What's your number? 1 or 10? Everybody got your number down? All right, this is where we're going to be really vulnerable with one another, all right? Really talk about, with your partner, how goes it with your soul? All right, number 5, get grouped and get grounded. Get grouped and get grounded. So effective pastors have a practice and philosophy of continuous learning and growth from all directions, meaning peers, mentors, coaches, and laity. You ever thought about that? Learning from 4 different directions. So how are you continuously putting yourself in learning groups? Now, I'm going to share with you another bias. Some of you have probably already heard this from me. But I think there's a difference between continuous learning and learning for the sake of learning versus learning for the sake of application. Right? We do not need to read another book or go to another workshop for the sake of learning more information. Right? We all have enough upstairs, and probably our hard drives are overflowing. But what if we learn for the sake of application, for trying, for doing? The number of workshops that we've been to where we collect the handout or the notebook, and we go back to our office or our home, and it lands on the kitchen counter or our desk. And then over the days, other stuff gets piled on it. And then there comes the day you go, okay, I've got to clear it off. And then what happens? It either goes in the trash or it goes on the shelf. And then what happens? If it's on the shelf, it just collects dust. Right? So going just for the sake of learning in today's world, I don't believe is a good use of our time, unless we're going to figure out how does this apply to my current ministry setting or to my leadership style or to my family, and what am I going to do with it? Because I think learning is part of our transformation. Learning is part of our continuous growing. Learning is part of us figuring out how to do ministry and life in the changing world around us. But if we just learn for the sake of learning and file it away, we're not doing anybody any favors. Now, all of our calendars are full, yes. But are they full of the right things? Do you have a mentor? Right? Some of these terms we use interchangeably, so I want to unpack them a little bit. A mentor is someone who's gone before you, who is wise. All right? The mentor is to try to keep you on the road and out of the ditches. Don't make the same mistakes I've made. Make new ones. Right? That's what a mentor is about. Peers. Peers, those are other pastors who are doing ministry alongside you, and you're learning from one another. That's an important piece of learning as well. Okay? A coach. Did you know in the Book of Discipline, right along with mentor, it mentions having a coach? Again, I'm not suggesting it to have something else on your calendar. But a coach is the opportunity for you to have the big picture conversations. A mentor is someone who's gone before you, but a coach is going to help you go forward. Pure coaching is you determining the agenda. Where are you struggling? What do you need to do? A coach helps you, here is my current reality. Let's figure out what it really looks like. What's the clear picture of today's situation? Where is it that you're wanting to head with that? And the coaching conversation is closing the gap in between. It's about forward action. It's about helping you discover your own answers. A consultant will tell you the answers. But a coach approach is helping you discover. And maybe you're going to have homework. Maybe you're going to have action steps in between. A good coaching session doesn't stop when the session is over. What I mean by that is there's something that happened in that conversation that keeps you moving forward, or that you're still thinking about it. I call it noodling around. It's something that you just can't quite get off your mind because there's something there that's going to take you in a different direction. Coaching is one of the most underutilized things that we can offer pastors today. Because the problem is, there is so much before you that you're going to spend all the time in what I call the fire truck. You're going to load up every morning and get the fire hose out and just take care of all the fires in front of you because that's what's blazing in front of your face. It's the emails that keep dinging coming into your inbox. It's the phone calls. It's the people walking in unannounced. It's the fires, right? And we get consumed by that, and we don't have the opportunity to be strategic and intentional, thinking about mission and vision and direction, and how are we equipping, rather than how are we handling the crisis of today. Coaching is that opportunity that every month or every other week that you know you're going to have that kind of conversation. And that will take you forward like nothing else, is to have a good coaching relationship where you are invested in it. Now, if you're showing up at a coaching call and say, all right, what are we going to work on today? That's my question to my client. What are we working on today? And you say to me, well, let me just fill you in. Most likely that means we haven't put any thought into what we're going to talk about. And you just rushed in from a meeting and you're still out of breath and not prepared for the intentional conversation that is invested in you at that moment. So you're not going to get the outcome. My clients, I require a prep sheet from the day before. Now, that's not because I'm wanting them to do more information, but I find that we have a much more effective coaching session when they have prepared. And the only way they'll fully prepare is if I ask them to fill out the prep form. But that way, we don't have to spend time talking about what happened, because that's on the prep form. But more importantly, I can hone in and say, gosh, I see that you completed your action steps from last time, and here's what we're going to talk about today. Where are we going to get started? Because all that work is already done. And so then we can use that 45 minutes or an hour to dive deep. That's one of the things that you'll see building up here is more of a network of trained coaches. Why do you suppose Jesus sent out the disciples 2 by 2? Support?
Motivation,
Motivation? Critique? Ooh. Encouragement? Right? So perhaps he knew the resistance they would encounter and the struggles they would experience. So, how are you grouping with other people? Either one-on-one or small groups, the leaders of your church. How are you finding those ways to be fed and to stretch you? The problem is, many of our church people and many of our leaders feel like, I got it all figured out, and therefore I don't need to invest in myself or invest in other groups because they don't see the value in that. I just feel in today's world, if we don't push ourselves and continuously learn and get into groups of people that are going to challenge us, that's the most important part. Don't get in a group that all we're going to do is bellyache about our churches, or get in a group where all we're going to do is talk about the fluff and not really talk about what's going on. It's a waste of your time. Not to say that you don't need fellowship, but what we need is deeper relationships where we're vulnerable, where we're being stretched, where we're learning. Those are the places to invest in. Are those that are going to cause us to maybe be a little uncomfortable. I always say, if you walk out of here, out of one of my workshops or any encounter with me, and you're not a little bit uncomfortable, I haven't done my job. Some of you have already found that out. Leaders seek outside voices, people to stretch them and help them develop new practices to take them to the next level. And here's the thing is we think we're going to get to the top level, whatever that looks like. And then they just keep moving the bar, don't they? They just keep moving the bar. We're never done. Just like discipleship is never done, leadership development is never finished. See, we got people in the pews that feel like discipleship is done because I've gone through confirmation and disciple 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, I'm like a turkey. The button has popped out. We're done. And that's how we have almost 3 generations now of pew potatoes. Because we led them to believe, we as a denomination have led them to believe that there isn't a continuous expectation of growing more and more Christ-like. The same with leadership. How are we stretching the people in our churches? We have the churches full of people who are still trying to do church like it was 1968.
It's hard when you get a difference of opinion.
It's hard when you get a difference of opinion, absolutely. And the thing is, Bill, when I find that when we get differences of opinion, the best question to get us off dead center is, help me understand how this is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, or how does this align, or how can we align?
It takes
If we
off
bring
the
it,
focus of what the difference is.
that's right, it takes it off the focus of the difference and brings us back to our purpose. If all else fails, the answer is Jesus, right? How do we help people when we continuously bring it back to our purpose? Effective leaders are self-aware of who they are and who they are not. Just as much as we need to know our giftedness and we can play on that and work in those areas, we need to know where our blind spots are, and hopefully they're not blind anymore. That they truly are self-aware to know where I fall short. And then do you surround yourself with circumstances and people to help in those places? Build on your strengths. And then surround yourself with those places that maybe you're not as strong. Do you know what those are? Do you know what the perceptions of you are in the room of other people? Because sometimes we think we're showing up one way when we're perceived perhaps as someone else. Or our intention is this, but the way it's presented, it comes off as that, perhaps. But how self-aware are you? How self-aware are you? So, what's your number? How are you doing with getting grouped with people and grounded in your leadership? What's your number on a scale of 1 to 10? Got it down? All right, turn to your neighbor, and you've got a few minutes to unpack.